So the 1960s neighborhood I grew up in was an architectural embodiment of a crew cut. We had straight, clear-cut streets, 3 models of houses, none of which topped a story and a half in height. Everyone took care of their lawn, and everyone favored short grass and low evergreens right in front of the windows. It was not a fancy neighborhood. It was mostly Protestant, though, which did put it slightly above my family's social class. My family did its best to fit in. We were clean and well-groomed, and we always scrubbed away any evidence of spaghetti sauce from every surface in our home. We had a white Chevy sedan, which we shared with the neighbors, who then paid the insurance. We had 2 pairs of shoes each, school shoes and gym shoes. Luckily, all the neighborhood kids ran around without shoes on all summer anyway. My family was content, thanks in great measure to John and Jackie Kennedy, the homemade royals who proved that Catholics could be upper crust too. But underneath the surface, my family had more in common with Kennedy's Camelot than most people knew. There were the obvious comparisons. Like the Kennedys, we were both Catholic, both ethnic. Kennedys were Irish and we were Italian, but both groups shout a lot and go to church. Just like Jack Kennedy, my dad had given up wearing hats. My dad wasn't the bon vivant that he would have liked to be. We kids just always smashed his hats, but still no hat. My mom was young and glamorous and had black hair like Jackie. I was Carolyn's age. My sister Christy was John's age. And then there was the clincher. Both families had certain connections. My great uncle was in the mob. Of course, none of us kids knew that at the time. He wasn't a total mob guy. He was just a minor functionary, a fixer, not the same kind of fixer that we were talking about earlier. He was a fixer in the days before Silver Shovel killed the profession as it was here in Chicago. Uncle Mike was an anonymous little clean-cut guy whose job it was to approach judges and offer a fee for a preferred settlement regarding traffic tickets, code violations, zoning ordinances, city inspections. It was nothing, my mother said. Nevertheless, he lived in a lovely Camelot-style home in the old money suburb of River Forest. He had a 26-inch colored television set in his living room. He had a long, low-slung car, a black Cadillac. His wife, my Aunt Pauline, wore gold lame heels, real furs, and actual pearls around her porcelain neck. No one would have guessed she used to be a stripper. My brothers and sisters weren't aware of those last bits, of course, the stripper thing or the mob thing. We only knew that when we visited on the holidays, bearing cheap little gifts, we were never to exclaim about the color television set or the roadster or the golden clothing and furniture. Just keep your mouth shut, my mom said flatly. It seems to be a common theme among us. You can admire nice new things if they're pointed out to you, but don't mention them otherwise. And you know, neither could we expect much in the way of gifts from our rich-seeming uncle. We got weird things like regifted socks and pairs of headbands. I know he looks rich, my mother murmured, but he didn't buy those things. They were gifts from his boss. But he doesn't like his boss, my mom said, so don't mention it. And don't mention that he doesn't like his boss. Just don't talk till we get out of there. And then she put on her special company grin and shoved us all inside. Now, my mother's orders came partly from this World War II era fear of oppression, fear of being noticed. In some Chicago neighborhoods, Italians were only barely tolerated. My parents were driven out of Schorsch Village, or my grandparents were driven out of Schorsch Village the minute they tried to sign their name. But mostly, my mom just wanted to show respect for my Uncle Mike. She knew his treasures weren't trophies. Instead, they actually made a mockery out of having it all. So Uncle Mike wasn't born in Chicago. His family arrived in 1909 when he was 5, in search of New World security and comfort. Mike was the oldest of 3 kids, and as soon as he could, 11 years old, he set out to make a living. The job market was tight. No one wanted to hire an underage guinea, dago, niggerwop, spick, or wetback. Those slurs were interchangeable then, and they all referred to Italians as well as a lot of others. He had somewhere to turn, though. A guy on the street told him about it. "There's an organization, see?" the guy said. "They're all Italian, like us. Kind of a mutual aid kind of thing. They can help you out." Mike was no dummy. "What do they get out of it?" he asked. His friend shrugged. "I don't know, workers," he said. "I don't know, but if you want a job, they got them." So Mike went to see the guy. Seemed to get a lot of respect. He told the guy he was a good worker, and the guy gave him a job on the pier, Navy Pier. Mike said something like, "Thanks, I owe you one," or "If I can ever do you a favor," or "Wow, how can I ever repay you?" Yeah, well, you've been to the movies. You know how it goes. Mike didn't know. Those movies weren't out yet. And if they were, he wouldn't have had the cash to see them. So after he'd been working a while, Mike's benefactor approached him for a favor. Perfectly legal. Carry this to there. Mike did it because he owed the guy. But he got paid handsomely for his work, and his debt wasn't canceled. It was just postponed. Other favors followed. They got shadier and shadier until Mike came to understand that he wasn't simply a vassal, but an accomplice, implicated in possible crimes. Of course, the organization would protect him as long as he stayed loyal. Mike was getting pretty busy, so he quit his other job. He was working now for what they called our thing. That's what Cosa Nostra means, our thing. In some ways, Mike's career wasn't exceptional. It was even pretty good. His job had lots of variety. His boss was generous. He was part of a community of sorts. Once he got on his feet, he was able to rescue his girl, Pauline, from her sordid career and marry her. She quit her job and gave him a little golden-haired boy whom Pauline called Donnie and Mike called Paisan. They bought a little bungalow in one of the better Italian ghettos, and they went to Italian-American picnics in the woods. When I was a kid, we were still going to those picnics in the woods. And they raised their little boy and hoped for a girl to match. It was a life. But there was something about it that rankled my Uncle Mike. He didn't particularly like being associated with something dishonest. And he hated the risks. And it bothered him to think of his total dependence on his boss. And he dreaded the thought that Donnie, who was frail and had only one lung, might go into the thing. So Mike decided to quit. Now, I don't know how that scene went. Did Mike walk into the boss's walnut-paneled office and say, "Boss, I'm sick of being a crook"? Did he use euphemisms? "Boss, I think it's time for me to retire, spend more time with my family," as the Republicans say. Did he write a letter of resignation? What about references? However he did it, the quitting thing wasn't popular. Clean-cut Mike had become a valuable guy, so the boss cajoled Mike back into the business. That worked for about a year or so, but Mike got restive again. So this time somebody beat him up. He stayed a while. The third time was the charm. It was a Friday night right after Victory Day in Europe, VE Day. Mike quit again. So some thugs went for Donnie. He was 18 years old now and downtown clubbing for maybe the second time in his life. They didn't shoot Donnie from a bank depository. They beat him to pieces in an alley behind a Rush Street bar. Neither Donnie nor Mike was all that important, so they probably just meant to scare him into line. But Donnie's one little lung collapsed. He died that night. Mike, well, he never quit again. His story was over long before his life was. His life dragged on another 30 or 35 years, post-Camelot years. He and his wife, my great aunt Pauline, they tried some more and failed to have a baby girl. Then they tried and failed to coax my mom into leaving her parents and moving in with them. Eventually, they adopted a golden-haired boy they tried to love. They moved to a middle-class suburb and then on to the tonier one, and their house filled up with stuff. Uncle Mike ignored it and planted a garden, and no one, not a soul, could set foot on that grass. Neighbors, they liked this tiny, tidy man, and they would marvel aloud at his garden. I met one of them once when I was still a kid. What kind of a world would it be, she beamed, if everyone could be like your old Uncle Mike? Mike patted my shoulder, and he smiled back at them. A big, wide smile. Except for his eyes. Thank you.